Tech Talk Tuesday. It's time. 6 o'clock Eastern. We're live here on my Facebook page. And I've got stuff I would love to share with you guys today. So let's sign us up. Chuck, number one today. Good man. Let's see who else you get on here. Let's get some more. Come on in. All right. We got some more. Got Sean in here. I got a lot to talk about today. So I warned you guys that I was going to talk a little bit about velocity stacks, air cleaners, hood scoops, intake air. John, this will be good for you too, John. Chris, yeah. Good afternoon. Dave, good to see you guys. Thank you all for clicking in. That's great. Got an old Star Racing shirt on here today. And, hey, Wink, winking at me, yeah. Getting ready to go to, hey, Kevin, I hadn't looked at the video yet, but I will. I wanted to say, like Wink, working on a project, and I haven't had a chance to review that stuff yet, but I think that if we'll all take a moment and kind of chew on this information, and please take it as an opinion, okay? I don't have an engineering degree. I don't have this, I didn't get these awards to know what I'm talking about here. All I did was run over stuff, blow up stuff, crash stuff, wreck stuff. Hey, Charlie, Greg, Larry, Mike. Yeah, hey, good to see you now, man. Some heroes on here. I just wanted to share with you guys that this is going to be a list of opinions on what I think I learned, and I studied this subject all about these intakes and hood scoops and air pressure and all. Hey, Yaska, Kevin, and all these names, these guys that are on here, you guys are, I feel the weight loading me down because there's some people on here that know what I'm talking about. So, yeah, Harper Charter. Jim, hey Jim, good to see you up so soon. I know you've been sleeping, and I'm glad to see you wake up in time to watch this. Hey Bryce, love that name. My daddy gave me that name. Isn't that funny? But anyway, I got some good stuff. I want to talk a minute. Not today, I'm going to show you the board, but this is just a really nice velocity stack. And I want to show you what's the difference, in my opinion, versus this one. And which one flows the most on the flow bench, and which one makes the most power on the dyno, and which one goes the fastest on the racetrack. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Yeah, thank you for that. My opinion is good. Yeah, I appreciate that because I understand. I mean, I got the bumps and bruises and the broken bones and I blew up all the money. Hey, Jeff, that's so funny, Jeff, you said. I had a fellow tell me at an engine conference one day, he said, you don't have the diplomas, but you got the world championship rings. So I was able to use that stuff to learn. And I want you to know that one thing I learned, and I shared it with a friend of mine today, I said, the best way to learn is to teach. And I guess it's not really teaching, but it's share what you think you know to people that are smart enough to know and add their opinion to it. So thank you. And I'm going to change over to the board now because that's enough BS. You guys didn't come on here to talk about my opinion on myself. But I'm going to change over to the board and let's go look at what this is about now. All right, mind the noise for a minute. And I'll change the position of the camera. Hey, Danny. Happy birthday, happy anniversary, happy whatever you cool kids got going. I'm glad to see y'all smiling faces on Facebook today. That was really cool. Yep, I have. There's a lot of questions coming, so you guys hang on a minute with all the questions. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jerry. I just want to show you, first of all, I would like to thank you guys for Tech Talk Tuesday number 158. That's over 3 years in a row every Tuesday. Also, I want to emphasize that this is based on, I'm going to slide this down a little lower. Please pardon the jerky and the sound. My opinions are what I think I know. This is very important to me because I know I have good opinions. I understand and I have a lot of things to prove how I think that way, but I'm not going to tell you that this is the facts. These are just opinions. So please, everything I claim that I think I know, please understand that it's up for debate in a way that I would love to challenge how my opinion could be, not in a derogatory way, but I would love for me to have a better opinion based on what I think I know, and I'll share that with you now. So I'm not going to sit on the couch and let all this stuff happen. I'm going to jump out here off the couch, and I'm going to tell you guys what I think I know and what I think I have learned. Thank you guys. All right, so first off, I want to say These are very important tools. And I've talked about this 100 times, and I hope you guys don't get tired of it. But the flow bench, the dyno, and the track. And I'm sure there are other really cool tools, simulation programs, et cetera, et cetera. But the flow bench gives us some great data. The dyno gives us some great data. And the results at the track give us pretty hard to argue with data. We have all had and known people that say, it said it was going to go fast on the dyno, but at the track it didn't because it's got some transient response problem, it's got some carburetor problem, it's got a velocity problem, it's got too narrow of a power band, everything I can think of hearing in my day. Flow bench is good because it needs to flow really good so that we can move air through the engine. This is what I want to impress upon you guys. I know I got a bad glare. All engines want more air and fuel. But the only thing that makes the power is the fuel. So we got to get enough. If we're going to run 13 to 1, 6 to 1, 2 to 1, 15 to 1, whatever our air fuel ratio is, we have to have enough air to mix it with the fuel. And as you need to burn more fuel, that means you're going to need more air. So when someone says that's too big of a throttle body, that's too big of a port, that's too big of a valve, then they don't understand why blowers, turbos, and nitrous work. Because you can take the same engine that's got too big of a port, too big of a valve, and too big of anything and put a turbo on it, supercharger, or turbo, or nitrous, and it's good. Because it adds more air and fuel. If you put a supercharger on it, you better get you a big 2 or 3 fuel pumps and some big hoses and some big nozzles because you're going to put so much air through the engine that you better have the fuel to go with it. And if you put turbos on one, you better have a couple of fuel pumps, a bigger tank, and bigger lines because you're going to have to add a ton of fuel to it. And the only reason all this makes more power is because you can burn more fuel. So that's an opinion, and I'm sure I'll get some rebuttals on that, but that's what I think I know. And going back to the flow bench, you can run a wet bench, and we've read about them. Not many people have them, but subjective data, in my opinion. But the flow bench tells us out of static state, whatever you pick, 1 RPM out of a whole range of RPM of an engine. If you're going to turn 8,000 RPM, your flow bench is going to tell you some data at whatever that lift is that you're measuring at 1 RPM during that time. And it's a snapshot and a broad spectrum of requirements. The dynamometer will tell you how much power it makes, and the track results are a combination of a lot of this stuff, including these 2 items. Now, give you an example just to start the story. This is a velocity stack from HPI. It goes on a big throttle body for a Milwaukee 8 or for a twin cam. It's like a 70 millimeter for a V-twin Harley. This also, there's throttle bodies and velocity stacks this size for cars. Mustangs, 80 millimeter, 100 millimeter, 120 millimeter. There's lots of big velocity stacks like this. But when you put this on the flow bench, it flows a whole bunch of air on the flow bench because this is a preferred shape to give you that. Here is a kind of a velocity stack and an S&S air cleaner. It's not a square edge, it's a nice radius entry, so it flows a lot more on the flow bench. Here is inside of an HPI air cleaner, and this is one of my favorite shapes. It's got a nice radius entry. It has a lot, it gathers and draws a lot around here. The thing that worries me the most about it is in order for it to fit, they had to offset it so close to the air cleaner wall here, whereas on the twin cams, they built all of these with this in the center of the throttle body. And then when the Milwaukee 8s came out, a lot of guys used the same parts and just drilled a different hole and made a different back for it, but they let the throttle, the opening, the intake opening be close to the wall of the air cleaner. But that's enough. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then this on the flow bench flows less because it's got a smaller hole. And on the dyno, it makes less horsepower because it restricts flow a little bit. So if you see guys that run these at the track, they know something that these guys don't know, my opinion. This guy that runs this at the track, he does not understand that if he's going to go 150 miles an hour in a quarter mile, there's 150 mile an hour coming right by this. And this is designed to intake air with 100 mile an hour wind coming. So this busts it all up, diffuses it. And this is a product or a version of the Novi stack, which is patented design that has 2 stacks in a stack. I didn't invent it. I sure enjoyed it. I have used it a lot in my life, but I wanted you to know that this stack right here will go 2 miles an hour faster down the drag strip than this one will, with no loss of performance. But it does not win on the flow bench test, and it does not win on the dyno test. This wins on the track test. So this works really good on the racetrack because we put a cover on it, and all the air has to come through this air cleaner, and it's nice still air that doesn't have any windage or turbulence running by it. But if you put this on the flow bench, it flows a lot of air. But if you put the cover on, it restricts a little bit of air. And then there's competitors out there that sell what they call a 0 loss air cleaner. And it really does. I mean, on the flow bench, if you flow 300 CFM without the air cleaner and you put the air cleaner on, it still flows 300 CFM. That's a 0 loss air cleaner. Now, what does it do? Is it big? Does it take up room? Does it stick out beyond your knee? Do you have to tuck in behind it? Is it a aero drag? That's another subject for another day. But on the flow bench, it wins because you get clean air without a loss. On the dyno, you win because it doesn't give you any loss. But there's no 150 mile an hour air blowing around it. That track is a back-to-back story that will answer that question for you. Now, move up here, because I'm going to ramble because I didn't prepare anything, but I wrote down all these notes. I wrote down all these notes so that I can share something about each one of these notes, and I'm going to do it as fast as I can so I don't run out of time. And I'll go over all your comments, all your questions later, but right now I'm going to machine gun this at you. And you are welcome to watch this again. Please understand, this recording of this will be on my YouTube channel. It's called Star Racing GA. All the episodes of Tech Talk Tuesday are on my Star Racing GA on YouTube. Also, if you want to see Tech Talk number 157, last week, you can go exactly to this date, this time, 7 days ago on my Facebook page and find it, because they're all on there too. I got wind tunnel, air cleaners, air box, and hood scoops, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about some experience I had. The late, great John Myers came on my team in 1989, and I had gotten to be really good friends with Larry Widmer, whose father was a big shot, big engineer, big money guy up there at General Dynamics. Larry Widmer's got a claim to fame helping NASCAR teams win. Roger Penske, when he did heads for, helped all kind of guys in the Ford stuff. He developed some of the Roush Yates port work that's still even used today, based on the old Cleveland head. And anyway, Larry Widmer was a great mentor for me. He taught me a lot about that all of this, the air boxes and hood scoops, and the engine wanted still air. And in our minds, most of us, if y'all can hear me okay, in our mind, we believe that there is some hurricane or some tornado going on in here, because the engine is asking for everything that fits in this little air cleaner, and the wind blowing outside of it is filling it up with air. So we figure that there's some kind of hurricane. Now, if you want to know about a hurricane, here it is. You got 100 mile an hour wind blowing across the end of this. You got an engine pulling on this side, and you got wind. And have you ever seen how a carburetor works? It's got like a discharge nozzle that sticks up in the throat with a needle comes up out of it, or it's got a main jet, and the air blows across this, and it creates a low pressure in the bowl versus what's going through the bore, and it makes the fuel draw out of the discharge nozzle and spray into the carburetor. This, on the side of your motorcycle, going 150 miles an hour, the wind comes by here, and it siphons the fuel out of the engine, and it gets all over your leg. I got photos of me on a Harley with 2 carburetors sticking out the side, with the gasoline is pouring out. In the photo of me going down the track, the gasoline's pouring out of this, going on my leg. And I'd come to a stop at the end of the track, and my right leg would be soaked with fuel. And by the time somebody'd come down there to get me or see me, it would be dry because it was gasoline. And so you had to jet really big for this. And then when you run this, now, all of a sudden, those jets are too big, because we want to run, say 13-to-1 air fuel, racing gasoline to air. We want to run 13 parts air, 1 part fuel. So when you've got this on here, you're having to carburate enough to go in the engine. You're having to add enough fuel for the engine to be fed and to feed the air that's going by. That's just how airflow works, y'all. So when you put this type of stack on, now so much more of that air that's blowing by is either busted up, it goes in here, and now you've got too much fuel because you were jetted for this show. So you gotta lean it down to where you get 13-to-1 air-fuel ratio, and if you're not running wide bands or you're a really good spark plug reader at the racetrack, you're gonna miss out on this show right here. So I just wanted to share that with you. We went to the wind tunnel 2005. We had a S&S sponsorship and a drag specialty sponsorship, and Chip Ellis was the driver. We had a 160 cubic inch Buell NHRA Pro Stocker. It was a big giant engine, runs 10,000 RPM, pair of 5 1/8 bore pistons, 3.8 stroke, turned at 10,000 RPM, like I said, and it had these gosh awful hood scoops hanging out the side of it. I designed them. I built it was my idea to put the big hood scoops on it because I'm a guy that wants the engine to get some air. I can give it fuel. I had 100 PSI on my fuel injection. I had a Bosch fuel pump that I could like throw all the fuel I wanted to at it, and I was running a pair of 93-pound injectors, and I wanted to run it at 95% injector duty, and I was getting a lot of air, and I wanted to get a lot of air so I could make some power. So we made big scoops so I could reach my hand in through the front of the scoops. You've seen these bikes before where they have the giant hood scoops, one on each side. I could reach my hand in and actually put my fingers in the throttle body because I wanted the engine to think it was outside. Skipping around to that, I wrote right here, have you ever flow bench tested with and without the body, with and without the air cleaner? Have you ever dyno tested with and without the body or the hood? And have you ever gone to the racetrack and run without the hood or without the body? Pro stock motorcycle, for instance, when you flow it with the head on the flow bench, and there's no obstructions. There's no air box. There's no aluminum panels, carbon fiber panels. There's no top. There's no sides. There's no bottom. You just got a head, and you got one of these big velocity stacks, and it is drawing some air. But in reality, when you put that flow benched engine on the chassis dyno, we take the body off, we take the hood off, we take everything off, and we put fans on it, and we try to make this engine make the most power we can on the chassis dyno. If you ran at the racetrack without all that stuff on there, you would be surprised, because at the racetrack, we're trying to get this data that we got off this flow bench and this horsepower we got off the dyno, and we covered up, we put the body on, we put the hood on. Super stock car, got two big carburetors up here, and you put a flat hood on it, and the hood's sitting against the carburetors. But you don't dyno it that way. If you're going to flow test it, why not put the carburetors on and set the hood on top of the carburetors and flow test it and see how it runs? That would be more simulated to what you're doing here. On the dyno, if you're going to chassis dyno your car, put the hood on and let the carburetor suck on the hood like it does on the racetrack. And if you're going to the track, it has all that stuff on it, and you're going to see something different. What I did, what I learned, was I had pro stock cars. I tuned pro stock cars in my day. I had pro mod cars. I had street cars. Back when John Myers started with me probably 30 years ago, I had a street car that would run in the 7s, and that was fast. Now you got to go into 5s with a street car to be fast. But way back then, 30 years ago, if you could go 790s and drive it to the track, you were like the man. And I had one that I ran around town all the time. It was a Corvette with a big block in it, and it had lots of nitrous on it. But it had a Dominator up on top of a big manifold. And I took the hood off and ran it up and down the road, and I was going about 100 miles an hour testing a new transmission that late great, rest in peace, my brother Richard Godley made a race power glide for me, and I could run it up to about 100 mile an hour, put it in high, and when I'd get to a certain speed, the gasoline in the Dominator would come rushing out of the Dominator and pouring on the windscreen, and here I am going 120 mile an hour down Bumphead Road down in South Georgia, and my windshield's covered in gasoline. And it feels like it's bogging. I mean, it's like, what the heck happened? Well, I did have wide bands on it. Went back to the shop, hooked all that stuff up, went back out and ran it down that road and recorded the data. I got back to the shop, and when I saw all the gasoline coming out of the carburetor, the wind was blowing across the carburetors, going over the roof of the car, and it siphoned all the fuel, no, it siphoned a ton of fuel out of the carburetors all over the windshield. And the widebands on my car said that it was super, super lean, is the reason it felt so weak. So I went back to the shop, put the hood on, 8 Zeus buttons later, went back out, and I thought I was going to wreck. It was so fast. I probably picked up 100 horsepower with the hood on it. But dyno testing, it made the most power without the hood. But on the track or the street, it made way more power with the hood. It's just a different reference point. Now, I might be talking out of turn here, but I just wanted to share that with you. Going back over here to the wind tunnel. We took the Buell to KB Racing. We hired a guy that was off for a couple days that worked for Gibbs. He was the aerodynamist for Gibbs. He knew his way around the wind tunnel there near Mooresville. I can't remember the exact town it is, but listen, I want to tell y'all, 2005 was 17 years ago, and the wind tunnel just for 2 hours was $12,000, and we got it between cup cars sessions. Everybody had white 18-wheelers, so you couldn't tell what team was there, and all the cars were unmarked, and they had sealed rooms that only you could go in, only if you were on the team you could go in and out. So what we did was we had our session at 3:30 in the morning. So we waited up all day and all night, and we went and rented the wind tunnel, and then we hired the guy from Gibbs' place. He was at KB helping, and they let us unload and prepare for the wind tunnel at KB Racing, and that was really great for Greg and those guys that let us in there. We were actually friends with Ken Black too, and back then it wasn't so secret where people were trying to, they were only trying to outrun Warren Johnson, and Warren Johnson was trying to outrun them, I believe, during that time. But what was fun about this was these guys helped us decide what to test with our little short time in the wind tunnel. So we had 27 test procedures we were going to try in the wind tunnel, and we ran out of time, only got 22 of them done, which if we hadn't hired this guy, and I'm keeping the names out to protect the innocent because some of them might have wanted to, or some of them might not wanted to know about it. But anyway, we did some stuff that were really cool, and I'm going to draw a picture of the scoops. The body of the bike looked kind of like this, and we had these big scoops sticking out the side of the bike that looked kind of like this. This is exaggerated. And all my guys, my sponsors, the big boss at S&S and everybody said, these scoops are too big. We've been to Bonneville 100 times, and we got all the 200-mile-an-hour rings and hats, and we know everything about Bonneville, and you're dragging parachutes down the track and blah, blah, blah. So we made these elaborate bullets that fit in the scoops, and we picked up a little less drag, which would have helped us go 1/3 of a mile an hour faster in a 1/4 mile. But thank goodness I was thinking ahead, and I got the guy that was helping us as the aerodynamist. He told me to put a big giant 3-inch flat washer in the exhaust pipe and weld it on a nut. So I had this exhaust pipe was 3 inches on each cylinder, and we put a flat washer with a bolt welded to it. And we put the wind tunnel air through the hood scoops, took the head apart, put the heads on, put the throttle body on, and we let the pressure go through the hood scoops, go down the velocity stacks, through the throttle bodies, through the engine with the pistons in it, and then let all that pressure go out the exhaust. And we tried to simulate the airbox pressure we were measuring with our V300 on the racetrack, which we would run somewhere going down the track. We would get anywhere from 0 to 19 inches, depending on how fast we went and how good of a job we did. 19 inches of water. That's not pressure. That ends up being 19 inches, ends up being somewhere around 0.7 of 1 PSI. But not to talk too fast, but we were able to duplicate the airbox pressure by opening these valves. They were giant 3-inch flat washer, and we could turn them parallel with the port, and had no airbox pressure, or we could close them until it would duplicate what the engine was trying to use versus what was going in, and we were able to simulate the airbox pressure in the wind tunnel by using throttles in the exhaust pipe. One day I'll tell more about that story, but it was interesting. Well, what I learned was if everything we did in the wind tunnel to make less drag so that this would go more speed at the end of the track would choke the engine for the amount of air it needed to go fast. So I made this little chart. This is homemade, and this is my thinking. So please don't beat me up about this, but I did a chart real quick with speed, 50, 100 mile an hour, 150, 175, 200. And then I got drag coefficient this way. And then I put a airbox pressure off our motorcycle where somewhere around 100, 120, we started building a little airbox pressure, which means the scoops finally were able to supply the engine with pressure, with air, and then build up against the opening and closing intake valves and build up pressure. And by 200 miles an hour, we were getting 19 inches of pressure. The drag of the scoops was terrible. It was 0 at no mile an hour, and it was the most drag at top speed. This is my opinion of how this went. And then this orange line here is the amount of air the engine needed. And if it was in reality, it would look like this. Gear changes going down the track. It would look like RPM, okay? But the engine needs the same amount of air at 100 miles an hour as it does at 200 miles an hour. The engine needs the same. I call it engine need. That's an opinion I have there. And what was wrong, in my opinion, with the Bonneville scoops, they wanted me to have Bonneville scoops where the motorcycle would start getting enough air at 200 miles an hour, because in Bonneville, it's a 5-mile long racetrack. They give you 2 miles to get up to speed. And if you're going to run a drag car there, you got 2 miles to go a quarter mile and get up to the fastest speed. And then you go into the first measured mile, and they give you a time for the first mile, they give you a time for the second mile, they give you a time for the third mile. And then you have to turn around and go back the other way in a certain amount of time, which I know nothing about. And then they average all these to give you the Bonneville speed. So the hood scoop at Bonneville for that engine might look like this. And for me, for drag racing, it might look like this, because I need air for the engine here, and I need air for the engine here. So it needs to be a movable or an adjustable size. It needs to be big at the starting line, and as you get to the finish line, it needs to go down. But the drag has to go up, because we have a starting line or an 1/8 mile scoop, and the drag is going up when we go down the track. But here's the good news for us drag racers, y'all. If you're going to do a 7-second run, 4.5 seconds of the 7-second run is used up in the first half. So when you feed your engine the most air it can get, you will pick up your time, your ET, your performance when you're going slow, and the drag may hurt you a little bit while you're going fast, but it is a great trade-off. And I just wanted you guys to see that as an opinion of what I'm looking at. Also remember that if your engine didn't want more power, more air, and more fuel, then blowers, turbos, and nitrous wouldn't work. But the reason your engine makes more power with a blower, turbo, or NO2 is because we're adding air and we're adding fuel and we're packing it in there, and it makes more power. So always choose to do whatever you can to get more air to move through the engine. And I'm not talking about flow bench air. I'm talking about cam timing is what makes the difference. So that's a Tech Talk Tuesday for another Tuesday. But back to this. Air cleaners. Air cleaners give us still air. Air boxes. If you've got the right air box, and like a Pro Stock car with a hood scoop and the air box, you know, the Pro Stock cars back in the day, they used to have a giant scoop on the hood, and they were developed. Two things I think mattered to them, to the Pro Stock scoops, and this is an opinion, is it had to be big enough to feed the engine so they could get to the finish line first. But it also had to be small enough to where it didn't drag them down like a parachute when they get going really fast. So it is a serious compromise of air scoop size. And if you can incorporate the hood scoops or the intake scoops in your bodywork to be aerodynamic as well, and be able to fill the air box up, and what the conspiracy theorists think we're building boost and building horsepower by putting air boxes on and hood scoops on. We're not building boost, y'all. We're just creating a atmosphere that the engine is trying to see. When you're on the flow bench, you're getting all the air you can get. When you're on the dyno, you're getting all the air you can get. At the racetrack, depending on how you're tied up on here, how much air gets. Last story to help us understand this phenomenon. I was one really great friend with a guy that was at Ford for 30 years, and he was in charge of a dyno shop, and they had about 30 dynos, and they were developing the 302 engine a long time ago. And their engineers told them, said, make all the horsepower you can with this. So they had this really nice 302, and it was powerful, and they got it to make 600 horsepower. 600 horsepower, this little 302. Think about it, this is 30 years ago. It had all these stacks on it, and it had these zoomies that made all this. So this 302 made 600 horsepower. And so they finished it, they gave it to the engineers, and the engineers said, what are we going to do with that? And they said, that's the 302, you wanted 600 horsepower. And I said, no, it's got to fit between the wheels, it's got to have fenders on it, it's got to have front end, a radiator, air conditioning, all that stuff, and we got to shut the hood. So when they finished with it, they made this little manifold, and they made this little roly-poly loaf of bread right here, and they got the hood to shut, and they got the wheels on it, and they got the front bumper on it, and it made 300 horsepower. But on the flow bench, it was good for 600, and on the engine dyno, it was good for 600, but when they got it in the car and drove it down the road, it had 300 horsepower. That's what I think I know about that. I'm sure I glazed over all this, and it needs further discussion, but I open this now. You guys watch it, kick me back some questions, and I will do my best to answer them and consider your opinion as well, because this is what I think I know. May God bless y'all. Thank you so much for Tech Talk. Number 158 is in the books. I hope to see you next Tuesday, and let's discuss these subjects and get back for number 159. May God bless. Good night.